Shalom, giving honor and praise to the Creator and the Maker of heaven and earth, the Most High Power. My name is Yeshaya Yisrael of the tribe of Dan of the nation of Israel. This is not going to be very long, but it's going to be to the point. Topic is Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter, verse 68. Now, many people know of this Tanakh here, the Stone Edition aspect, okay? So, as far as it goes in that particular case, we're going to go, brothers and sisters, to that portion in Deuteronomy 28:68. And it says the following, so we can gain an understanding of what we're speaking of. The Lord will bring you back into Egypt in ships. On the road which I said to you, you shall never see it again. And there you shall offer yourselves for your enemies as bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you. Now, one of the key things that they attempt to get at the black Hebrew Israelites about is when they're saying that it says on the path or on the road or on the journey in certain translations, which I have said you shall never take again. And they're saying to the Hebrew Israelites that we never explained this kind of aspect, but we will. Let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 17, if we will. All right, so we can gain an understanding of what we're talking about. And it says this, Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 16. Only he shall not have too many horses for himself, so that he will not return the people to Egypt in order to increase horses. For the Lord has said unto you, you shall no longer return on this way again. So I just want that to be noted. What I just read is Deuteronomy chapter 17, verse 16. Now, the key thing to want to point out is in Deuteronomy 28, verse 68, all right, when it says emphatically, by the way which I said unto thee, you shall never see it again. We have to understand what is that it that is being spoken about. All right, so that's something to be noted and understood for edification purposes. Was it against the way of the Most High God to sit there and never have Israelites ever in the side of the literal land of Egypt in Northeast Africa? Or was it a thing in which the Egyptians were being used as a catalyst by the Israelites for security in certain cases? Because when you go in the book of Ezekiel, it says that the Egyptians were a thorn inside the hand of Yisrael. When they leaned upon Egypt for help, it broke and then it became a thorn in their hand. So when the Israelites hoped per se to get assistance against the Assyrians by the Egyptians, that didn't work too well for the Israelites. So that's what that's talking about in that particular case. The king is not supposed to multiply horses that you go not on this way again. Remember, when the Exodus happened in the book of Exodus chapter 13, it says, you shall not see this Egyptians here anymore. The Egyptians were the captors of the Israelites. So the Israelites were being told they would not see the captivity anymore. Not that they would never see another Egyptian or that they would never be literally inside the land of Egypt itself in Northeast Africa. So that's something I just wanted to point out for edification purposes. Another thing is that many people attempt to come to the Israelites and to begin to try to sit there and state, well, if you look at the history and if you get into the history of the matter and so forth and so on, they're trying to say that Deuteronomy 28 from verse 48 to verse 68 is only in regards to the Israelites and the Romans. However, what we're going to do within this 10 or 15 minutes is begin to show and explain that such is not the case. All right, so one thing to point out for edification purposes. Now, I want to sit there and read Deuteronomy 28, verse 68 in Hebrew. It says this, right? Weheshilkaya mitzrayim ba'aniyot ba'derek asher amarti laka lo tosif o lir'ota wahit makaratem sham lo'oebecha la'abadim walit fakot wa'inkone. Okay, now that's the Hebrew aspect. The word that's translated as Egypt in Hebrew is the word, all right, Mizraim. The word Mizraim actually means two different words put in one, Matzir and Yam in one case. Matzar or Matzir means distress. All right. Now, when you go in your own time, okay, inside of this book right here, we'll begin to sit there and see that. Okay. I'm going to show exactly what I'm talking about on this. This is a Ben Yehuda Hebrew English Dictionary, right? And in this, it says the following, so that way we can gain an understanding of what we're talking about. where you see it highlighted there, all right, you see it? Where it says metzar, and the Hebrew that's used there is the word distress in English. So the plural of metzar is metzraim or matzarim. And that word in unison, all right, okay, it means emphatically what? It means distress. So now, the Hebrew word enayim, right, means eyes. The Hebrew word yadayim means hands. The Hebrew word sifatayim means lips. The Hebrew word nekirayim means nostrils. Because anything that's a dual plural in Hebrew has the ayim sound at the end of it. Yerushalayim, all right, translated as Jerusalem. It literally means the city of peace, doubled. It's a double piece. Yerushalayim. The ayim signifies a dual plural. Matayim means 200. So I just want to use that as an example and let it be noted. So if you already see all of the ayim aspect, then what in the world would mitzrayim mean? That means the metzar is doubled. The distress is doubled. So now my question then is, how do they sit there in syntax and linguistically connect that to meaning Egypt? When we already see in Hebrew, okay? When we already see in Hebrew, all right, that you have it to where metzar means distress, right? And so metzrayim means double distress. So we have to begin knowing, see, the true people of the Egyptians didn't call themselves that. The Israelites called the Egyptians that. That was a name, a generic term that the Israelites or the Hebrews placed upon the people that we know later on in history as the Egyptians. All right, but the people who were called Mitzrayim or the Mitzrim did not call themselves by that name. So therefore, the Hebrews or the Israelites, truth be told, as an Israelite, did not have a monopoly on what that name must be called outside of their own particular records. Just the same, the people that we know as the Canaanites at one time was called the Retenu by the ancient Egyptians. The people that was called the Arameans at one time was called the people of Kor by the Egyptians. The people we call the Egyptians were at one time called the people of Magan by the Sumerians. The Hebrews at one time were called the people of Sagaz by the Sumerians. You understand? So we have to begin knowing, see, and understand that the people in the ancient world called each other nations and tribes different names that were generic terms. All right, so I want that to be noted for edification purposes. So when you read about the Mitzrim or Mitzrayim, what we're reading about, brothers and sisters, emphatically is the double distress. That's what that's talking about. Now, who's going to cause the children of Israel to go into the double distress by ships? It says Yod He Wah He, the Most High God. You understand? So let's see how the Most High God, the same Yod He Wah He, described what he said about the children of that particular place. Exodus chapter 20, verse 1. All right, because we want to let it be noted that the Most High doesn't have to be quote unquote politically correct, because it says Egypt, because you thought niggas didn't get into Hebrew. All right, so it's what it is. You understand? So we're going to get back into Exodus chapter 20, verse 1. It says, God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. So the Hebrew, it says what? Anoki Yod He Wah He Elohecha. So the double distress is also called the house of bondage. Just as much as many people like to say the children of Israel, even the apple of his eye, when you go into the book of Zechariah. You understand what I'm saying? It's synonymous, Jeshurun, wax fat and kicked when you go into the book of Deuteronomy. That's a nickname for the children of Israel by their own selves. You understand what I'm saying? So when a people is being called Mitzrayim, or the people of Mitzrayim, or the dual plural of the Hebrew word Metzar in the Hebrew language, we have to understand the linguistics of the people that speak it. Without respecting that, the whole meaning and understanding is totally distorted. All right, so that's something I want to be noted for edification purposes. Now, I have an article here that I'm going to read. I posted it on a couple of people's YouTube pages when they try to sit there and say the black Hebrew Israelites don't know what we're talking about. All right, so I want to sit there and ask anybody, any scholar, any Hebrew to conflict with what I just said. I'm presenting the challenge to any Jewish rabbi that thinks that the black Hebrew Israelites are off in what we're saying about the Hebrew that I just explained. I challenge any one of them. And I'm not trying to sound boisterous or arrogant or belligerent. I did this presentation before, and about maybe a little over 1,300 people saw it. I'm going to assume that some of them were Jewish. and some of them knew Hebrew. So I say this in due respect on my YouTube page, Kashub Danite. All right, because I have another YouTube page called More Yeshaya. But on this particular YouTube page, I'm going to come, blessed be the Most High, a little bit more raw and rugged in this kind of presentation without profanity at the same token. All right, now for anybody who was offended by the N-word I used earlier, to the elders who listened to me, I apologize. Okay, says the matter of Deuteronomy 28:68 in written form, giving honor and praise to the creator and the maker of heaven and earth. This here is based on Deuteronomy 28 verse 68. That verse, yes, it is speaking of the Atlantic slave trade and not a matter of the time of Rome. Now, many people who read this article in the past have said, well, you said it's talking about America. I never said America. I said the Atlantic slave trade. The Atlantic slave trade went to what we call the Caribbean before we came to what we call the United States of what we became America. But they already have a fixed idea about the understanding of the black Hebrew Israelites to where they really don't really read the post, listen to the video carefully, or what have you, and then they jump the gun. And they wind up like, well, what I meant was, no, what you should have done was read and reread or listen and re-listen before you try to conflict. All right? So let's go on in this. According to some, the verses between Deuteronomy 28, 48, and 68 is only in regards to the Israelites and the Romans. Some have said that the eagle that swooped down on the Israelites are the Babylonians. One thing to shut that down in respect is in verse 49, it says, a nation you know not, yet the Israelites did know of the Babylonians. Another may say that the language which you knew not is speaking of the Babylonians, yet the lingua franca, which is the basic language, like English is the lingua franca of many countries, like even in Africa, all right? The lingua franca of the time when the Israelites and the Babylonians came in contact with the Aramaic. All right, but we have to know and understand that the maternal line of the ancient Israelites is the Aramean women, Leah, Rachel, Bilhah, and Zilpah. And you had kings of Israel like Elah, Zimri, Timni, and so forth that had basically Aramaic rooted names. Simeon said in what is understood as Hebrew, truly Aramaic, as Shimon. One of the 12 tribes of Israel is named after an Aramaic name. Shama is not a Hebrew word, just because it's written in Hebrew letters. You understand? Shama is an Aramaic word meaning to hear or obey. The Hebrew root word for hearing is he'ezin, which comes from its root form ozen, which means ear. By the way, the Hebrew word aznayim means ears because you have two ears. So we see aznayim means ears. So Mitzrayim, the ayim or the matzah is double. This is something we want to point out in Hebrew edification, but they swear that niggas don't read. All right, so we're going to continue on and don't deny when they say, because now it's like, oh, he seems to be a smart nigger. You understand what I'm saying? But you know good and well, you did not expect someone to get into the Hebrew, break down what the hif-el stem is, break down what the hip-el stem is, and all these things like that. They're like, I have experienced it as a 30-year-old, now 36-year-old black man living in what we call the United States. You speak Hebrew? Why do you speak Hebrew? Because I'm supposed to say everything's supposed to be, oh, look at that B-I-T-C-H and look at that heart A-S-S and so forth and so on. I'm not supposed to sit there and go into their even understanding of the Strong's Tanakh and go into the Hebrew. No, you weren't supposed to do that. You understand? But we're going to continue on in this for time purposes. This has to be understood from 3 points in Deuteronomy 28:68. Biblical, historical, and lingual. I want to state that the recent attacks online by the Christians to the Israelites in regards to our claim of verse 68 is only to support the religion of Christianity. All right, now if Deuteronomy 28:68 is talking about the Atlantic slave trade, right, you have to begin to sit there and ask, why are they trying to say it's not? It's because then the prophecies that's still in the so-called Old Testament are still going to come to pass. And therefore Christianity cannot stand. So if they say that all of that happened in Deuteronomy 28:68 with 70 AD with Titus of Rome, then Jesus Christ and everything else can sit there and come into play. Yod-Heh-Wah-Heh is not Lord and Savior, and Yisrael is not the priest, the prophet, and the chosen. See, it's strategic. You understand? So we're going to go on in this particular aspect right here. Deuteronomy 28:45 says, and all these curses shall come upon thee, and shall pursue thee and overtake thee, till thou be destroyed. Because you did not hearken to the voice of Yah your power, to keep his commandments and the statutes which he commanded thee. The fact remains that it says all these curses. Thus we have to read what the curses are to gain an understanding. The claim made that verses 48 to verse 46, from verse 48 to verse 68 is only happened in the matter of the Israelites and the Romans. Yet we see Deuteronomy 28:53 says this, and thou shalt eat the fruit of thine own body, the flesh of your sons and of your daughters. Now, in 2 Kings 6:24, we see, and it came to pass after this, that Ben-Hadad had gathered his hosts and went up and besieged Samaria. Samaria was the capital of the northern kingdom. This occurred in the 9th century BCE. So Deuteronomy 28, when you read on your own time the entire verse of verse 58, it says what? That the people will be besieged. But if you're saying from verse 48 to verse 68 only happened in the time of the Israelites and the Romans, then how do you have the same thing happening in prophecy in biblical timeline in the 9th century BCE when the Israelites and the Romans did not come in contact until the 1st century BCE? You're not supposed to know Hebrew and history. See, that's why I said in order to understand Deuteronomy 28:68, one must know history, linguistics, and biblical understanding. All right? So let's go on. Deuteronomy 28:62. And you shall be left few in number, whereas you are the stars of heaven for multitude, because you did not hearken to the voice of the Lord thy God. So here we see that the people of Israel will be left few in number. 2 Kings 10:32 says this. In those days the Lord began to cut Israel short, and Hazael smote them in all the borders of Israel. Again, we see the Israelites cut short in numbers, and that is before the era of the Israelites and the Romans. So if Deuteronomy 28 from verse 48 to verse 68 is only in regards to the Israelites and the Romans, that means by default, none of them verses should be happening after the era of the Roman Empire or before the era of the Romans and the Israelites meeting, right? According to their ideology. So let's see. So far, we already knocked out that concept that the verses from the 20 verses from verse 48 to verse 68, they're saying only happened with the Israelites and the Romans. So how is it they have the famine and unfortunately doing cannibalism and eating the flesh of their own children in regards to the time of the dumb and the Arameans? How is it that you have it to where they're being besieged in the time of the Babylonians when you go to 2 Kings 24? You understand what you're doing, the era we're going to get into as we go on in this presentation. Says this, Deuteronomy 28:63, we see, and it shall come to pass that as the Most High rejoice over you to do you good and to multiply you, so the Most High will rejoice over you to cause you to perish and to destroy you, and you shall be plucked from off the land, whether you go in to possess it. Now this right here is very, very important. All right, let's remember this. It says this. We see here that the Israelites were told that they will be plucked from off the land they went to possess. Okay, part 1. In the book of Isaiah 1 verse 7, we read the following. Your country is desolate, your cities are burned with fire, your land, strangers devour it in your presence, and it is desolate as overthrown by floods. Psalm 79 verse 7, we read, for they have devoured Jacob and laid waste his habitation. Psalms 124 says in part, then the waters had overwhelmed us, the stream had gone over our soul. Then the proud waters had gone over our soul. The above shows us that the waters, all right, in Psalms 124 and the floods, all right, and Isaiah 1 verse 7 are the nations. And that in Psalm 79 verse 7, it says, those same people have devoured and laid waste the habitation of Jacob. So they were being plucked from off the land prior to the timing of the Romans coming in contact with them. It says the point is that all this happened before the timing of the Israelites and the Romans meeting each other. It is the thought of the Christian who comes against the Israelites in the matter of Deuteronomy 28 verse 68 that it all began from verse 48 with the Romans and ended with the Romans. If you remember, Deuteronomy 28:45 says all these curses shall pursue and overtake thee. We can see that it began to happen while Israel was still in the land. Daniel chapter 9 verse 11 says this, another important point, remember this. It says, yea, all Israel have transgressed thy law, and have turned aside so as to not hearken to thy voice. So there have been poured out upon us the curse and the oath that is written in the law of Moshe, the servant of Elohim, for we have sinned against him. Now this is Daniel chapter 9 verse 11. This is during the era when you go in Daniel chapter 9 verse 1, it speaks about Darius. So now we're speaking about the Medes and the Persians ruling. So now we're speaking in the 6th century BCE. 6th century BCE, Daniel is already saying that the oath and the curse that's written in the law of Moses, aka Deuteronomy 28, is already poured out upon the people. All right? So, good? All right, let's continue. So, as we see in the book of Daniel that Israel was going to go through the curses that was written in the law of Moses, we explain that the curses began to happen before the Israelites and the Romans came in contact with each other. All right? Deuteronomy 28 verse 63 said the people will be plucked from off the land whether they went to possess. Then in Deuteronomy 28:64 we see this, and the Lord shall scatter thee among all peoples, from one end of the earth even to the other end of the earth. And there you shall serve other gods which thou hast not known. Thou nor thy fathers, even wood and stone. So we see in verse 63 about the plucking, and then in verse 64 about the scattering from one end of the earth to the other. Then in verse 65 we see this: and among these nations you shall find no repose, and there shall be no rest for the sole of your foot. But the Lord shall give thee there a trembling heart, and failing of eyes, and languishing of soul. So we see it went from plucking to being scattered to worshiping idols to having no rest for the sole of your foot. No rest for the sole of your foot means one is a nomad. You are always moving about. This being after the plucking and the scattering happened. All right. So Deuteronomy 28 verse 68 saying that the Most High will bring Israel into captivity or the double distress in ships. All right. It basically is letting it be known that this happened after they were scattered and after they were plucked from off their land. So you can't go and try to say it was about Titus and he taking Israelites from the land of Israel to literal Egypt and then just end the story there as if once those people were shipped there and then that's the end of the history of the Israelites. But in order for Christianity to stand, in order for Judaism to stand, in order for Kemetic science to stand, they got to try to then say that that verse is only talking about the Israelites and the Romans. You understand? So let's go into this aspect right here. And it says the following. The people who say Deuteronomy 28, 48, verse 68 is only about the Israelites and the Romans do not explain why in verse 65 it says among these nations. And in verse 64 it says from one end of the earth to the other. So the Romans didn't take the Israelites from one end of the earth to the other. To this day, we can actually see Israelites scattered from one end of the earth to the other. So-called Falashas, Beta Yisrael, who lay claim. The Shinlung in Afghanistan that lay saying that they're Israelites. The people who actually look quote-unquote Chinese, called the Shinlung, that live in, not the Shinlung, the people that live in Kaifeng, China, who look Chinese, saying that they come from the tribes of the northern kingdom of Israel. All right? So there are many claims throughout the world of people saying that they are from the 12 tribes of Israel. But those claims have to be suppressed in order for Christianity or Christianity and Islam and Judaism in order for them to sit there and stand. And by the way, and also for the Kemetic science thing to stand. Because some Kemetic brothers actually try to combat myself and saying, brother, you're taking this too far. You don't know what you're talking about. And that ended with the Romans and so forth and so on. We're going to address all of that in this particular aspect. Because to anybody listening to this, if you're into Kemetic science talking about Ramses and Thutmose, our ancestors, this doesn't concern you. This is a matter about the black Hebrew Israelites addressing the matter presented by white European Jews. So being that you claim Kemetic and not Israel and not Judaism and not the Talmud or the Torah, therefore you have no claim in that kind of argument. You're trying to step into an arena that you have no business in. You understand? So I just want that to be noted for edification purposes. So all the Kemetic people talking about we are the ancient great pharaohs, Deuteronomy 28:68 presented by an Israelite is not for you to try to contest. Because you can't go into the walls of the Metuneta. You can't go in Abu Simbel. You can't go to the Temple of Soleb and West Amara. You can't go into all these different types of things and Dondera's pyramid text and all this other kind of stuff. You can't sit there and go into these kind of things and then try to contest what the Israelites are saying. Because no Metuneta or no hieroglyphic or no demotic or no hieratic writing speaks about what will happen in prophecy to the Egyptians. In order for them to do that, these people like Phil Valentine had to actually go in Ezekiel to try to say, well, it says the Israelites, the Egyptians were scattered. That's what he said. Phil Valentine had to go and say biblical prophecy is talking about the black man, but he tried to chase it to the Egyptians being scattered. But Ezekiel 29 about the scattering of the ancient Egyptians, right, is emphatically talking about them being scattered for 40 years and then being returned. Now, in my book here, Egypt Talk and Writing, I addressed that. All right, for those interested, this is available on Amazon. We're not playing salesman, but just letting it be known. All right, good. So we're going to continue on, all right? And it says the following. Let us understand some dates. Assyria took Israel captive in 721 BCE. Babylon defeated Assyria in 609 BCE. Babylon took Judah in 586 BCE. Persia defeated Media in 550 BCE and Babylon in 538 BCE. Persia allowed some Israelites to go back to the land in 538 BCE. Persia defeated by Greece in 331 BCE. Greece under the matter of after Alexander. The Ptolemies had ruled over Israel from 320 BCE until 198 BCE, when Scopas lost in a battle between him and Antiochus III in the Pinion battle. Greece lost to Rome in two parts, one at 168 BCE in the Pydna battle, when Paulus defeated Perseus of that nation, and the other one at 146 BCE, when Mummius defeated the Greeks in the Third Corinth battle. So I just want that to be noted. You can see the timeline right here. I just want that to be noted for edification purposes. So how are we going to get into the aspect of what happened with the Israelites and the Assyrians and on from there? All right? Good? Okay. So now let's continue on in this particular aspect here. According to Tacitus, the Roman historian, it was Pompey who was the first Roman to gain entry into the temple in Jerusalem. Pompey made Jerusalem a Roman province in 63 BCE. After him, it was Julius Caesar. Then after him, Augustus, then Tiberius, then Caligula. Caligula was in conflict with the Israelites until he got assassinated in 41 AD. All right? Then we see the era from Claudius to the matter of Claudius becomes interesting, because that is when some of the Jews were in Egypt already, in a place called Alexandria, during the era of a guy named Tiberius Alexander. Tiberius Alexander was an Israelite in Egypt and Northeast Africa who didn't want to follow the ways of being an Israelite, all right? And it says this: he died in the year 70 AD, when there were Jews already in there. So when they're trying to say, well, the Jews that was in Egypt was sent there by Titus in 70 AD, you have yet to sit there and show the evidence of that. All right, so let's go on. By ships, I'm saying. He did send them into Egypt, but not by ships, like Deuteronomy 28:68 says. All right? After the matter with Claudius, we see Nero, and he died in 68 AD. But he had sent Vespasian to go against the Israelites, and he conquered the places called Jotapata, Gamala, and Samaria, as well as Jericho. He and his son Titus in 69 AD agreed that Titus could stay in Israel while he went back to Rome to become emperor. When the timing happened that he took Jerusalem, he did so, and this is recorded in Josephus and in Tacitus. Titus, the Roman emperor, in time he became the emperor, all right, according to some, took Israelites from Israel, the land, to the land of Egypt. Yet no one has shown evidence of such. All right, some attempt to use the book of Josephus, but as stated in the book that I just showed, Egypt Talking Writing, I explained that it says he took them by going into Egypt in bonds. It doesn't say ships. Now, when you go into the book of the Wars of the Jews, book 7, verse 5, all right, it goes into that aspect of saying that he took them by sea to go over into Italy, but after he crossed the desert. So it was no problem for Titus of Rome to cross the Sinai. All right, so read Josephus carefully to gain an understanding in regards to that. According to both Josephus and Louis Furtwängler in his book entitled The Jew of Rome, that's a college reference book. That book entitled The Jew of Rome by Louis Furtwängler, you can't get it on Amazon for less than $100. So we're talking collegiate aspect material. I personally borrowed that book, and I can only use it as a reference, and not to be haughty, I actually teach in the college. And they still would not sit there and let me hold it outside of that aspect of going outside that library. Then I looked it up online that stated you're not getting it less than 100. All right, so these are the kind of books that we may want to try to sit there and delve into, because remember, they didn't want us to read during slavery for a reason. All right, it says this. It says that in both books there that Titus crossed the desert, the Sinai desert. It was not necessary to use ships, though in ancient times some did. One thing I want to point out in concluding is this, is that the Bible says the matter of Deuteronomy 28:68, after we read of the scattering and the plucking of the Israelites from their land. They were scattered after being plucked, then worship idols, then we don't have assurance of their life, and then sent to captivity or the house of bondage or the double distress in ships. See, Deuteronomy 28 verse 68 starts with the word and. And is a conjunction. So it's causing two different clauses to come together. So you just can't try to just start there and then just say that's that. All right, so I just want this to be noted for a reason and purposes. All right, the Son of the Most High God is Israel. In order for Christianity to blossom, the name of Israel must not be in remembrance anymore. It must be cut off. So those who fight against the Israelites about Deuteronomy 28:68, All right, they're trying to basically keep their foothold inside of Christianity alive. All right, and also in the aspect of trying to maintain a foothold in the Kemetic science or the Egyptology or anything else, and so forth. Now, Isaiah chapter 43, we're going to conclude with this. All right, Isaiah 43, we're going to start in verse 5. Because many people even try to come against the Israelites, or supposedly the same people who say they believe in the same book. It says this: "Fear not, for I am with thee. From the east I will gather your offspring, and from the west I will gather you. I will say to the north, give them over, and to the south, do not withhold. Bring my sons from afar and my daughters from the end of the earth." So that's talking about the children of Israel being scattered and then being gathered. So that prophecy ain't come to pass yet. So there's no room for Christianity, Judaism, and Islam under the word of the Most High. So with that, I say, Torah for the time. Shalom.